Aloha, and thank you for joining us today on what would have been Jack's 81st birthday. I'm Ollie, his eldest granddaughter. Most of you knew him as Jack, but I knew him as Grampy. Grampy is a combination of grumpy and crampy. He came up with it himself for my sister and me because he thought it was a good descriptor of himself. I always loved his sense of humor. I also loved that he would entertain us with magic tricks. He learned the tricks just for us. He would order one a month and figure out how they worked. We never figured out how they worked. He was curious about everything. I knew Grampy was accomplished and well-loved, but I didn't realize all the lives he touched until I heard about all the people who wanted to be here, most of whom can't. So thank you to Simple Media Hawaii for helping us live stream the event today. Our officiant is Reverend Dr. George Scott. He's a very good friend of our family, and I'm honored to welcome him to the podium now.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Aloha, everyone. Aloha. It's a wonderful opportunity right now to perhaps pause for a moment. Let's reflect upon the life of Jacob Jack Bilmes and what he meant to each one of us in our own special way. So just a brief moment of silent meditation as we go forward. We gather today as family and friends, both near and far, to remember and celebrate the life of Jacob Jack Bilmes. We find wisdom teachings and gain insight in how we are to live life from many perspectives and varied voices. In the scriptures, we hear it said that we brought nothing into the world, and we surely can take nothing out, which of course is quite true. However, we dare to say that while we can take nothing from this world, we truly have the opportunity to live our lives to its fullest and leave our mark upon the world once we're no longer physically present. Jack leaves his handprint upon the many lives that he touched. We see his handprint and evidence of his life's work and passion in the words of gratitude and from his students, colleagues, and lifelong friends. Jack's handprints is on the heart of his loving wife, Pangsuan, his precious daughter, Leela, awesome and wonderful granddaughters, Olivia and Malia, his caring and steadfast son-in-law, Brian, and all of his family and dear friends. Jack walked with us, and we'll share memories today of his times together, and we'll lift up moments that could cause us to laugh as well as shed a few tears. We're grateful for Jack's handprint upon our lives and this world. We will now hear from Dr. Alan Howard, Jack's good friend for many years and professor in the University of Hawaii Anthropology Department. Dr. Howard will share Jack's eulogy. Welcome.
Guess I don't need sunglasses facing this way. Jack was born and raised in Queens, New York, where he was exposed to a Jewish culture that included a love of learning, a penchant for puzzling over life's mysteries, debating viewpoints, and a dry, self-deprecating sense of humor that often involves a play on words. Jack loved to play with words. These attributes were embedded in Jack's character in combination with a fascination with the more exotic and bizarre aspects of human nature. Such qualities made him a superb anthropologist and a great teacher and a delightful friend. I'm going to go a little bit about his background. Jack was accepted to the prestigious Bronx School of Science, which he attended for a year, after which point his mother decided the commute from Flushing was too far. After graduating from Flushing High School, Jack enrolled in Alfred University in upstate New York, where he encountered a culture of anti-Semitism and other parochialisms that motivated him to leave in favor of Brandeis University in Boston, where he majored in English and American literature. Following graduation in 1961, he went for Peace Corps training at the University of Michigan, where he met his wife-to-be, Pong Sawan, shortly before leaving for Thailand to teach English as a second language. They married in 1963 when he concluded his term of service. Jack returned to the United States, having been accepted to a graduate program in Southeast Asian Studies at Yale University. While working toward his master's degree, Jack nurtured an interest in anthropology. He took time off from his studies and accepted a position as community development advisor in Laos for the U.S. Agency for International Development from 1965 to 1967 to explore his budding passion in cultural phenomena. He did eventually return to Yale and completed his master's degree in 1968. His love of anthropology led him to seek advanced degrees in the subject at Stanford University, where he obtained an MA in 1970 and a PhD in 1974 for research that he conducted in 2 northern Thai villages, to which he returned 7 times between 1988 and 2004. He also did fieldwork in Bali, in Indonesia, in 1997. Jack joined the Department of Anthropology at UH Manoa in 1973 as visiting assistant professor. That's when we first met and became fast friends. He was promoted to associate professor in 1981 and to full professor in 1990. He loved teaching, especially the introductory course in cultural anthropology, as well as graduate seminars, and he continued to do so as an emeritus professor without compensation, following his formal retirement in 2011. He also served as graduate chair in the department from 2009 to 2011, and on numerous MA and PhD committees. Over the years, his research and teaching interests turned to conversation and discourse analysis, which included logical elements of arguments and negotiations, as well as ethnomethodology and social action theory. In line with these interests, in 1977 and again in 1982, he received permission to conduct research at the Federal Trade Commission in Washington, D.C., where he recorded meetings and debates and analyzed them accordingly. As his international reputation in these areas grew, he was invited to take up visiting positions in a number of foreign universities and institutes, including Laboratoire Ethnologie, I should be able to pronounce that, being an anthropologist, in Paris, at the University of Paris, Nanterre, in Aalborg University in Denmark, and Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, China. He also was a fellow in the Institute of Culture and Communication at the East-West Center in 1989. His list of publications is impressive and includes 2 books, Discourse and Behavior in 1986, and an online edition of The Structure and Meaning of Talk, Explorations in Category Analysis, which he put up online in 2015, as well as 46 articles and book chapters. In addition, he regularly organized sessions and gave presentations at conferences all over the world. In recent years, he has been internationally recognized as one of the leading innovators in his field. Sports were also a very important part of Jack's life, and I was fortunate enough to share a good part of it. He was a keen competitor in ping pong and tennis, which we played together almost on a daily basis at the university ping pong table that were available. And in later years, a wonderful companion on the golf course, where despite serious health issues, he continued to play until about a month before his death. He's survived by his wife, Pong Sawam, daughter Leela, who's married to Brian, granddaughters Olivia and Malia, with whom he enjoyed sharing magic tricks and a love of music of many genres. He took up African drumming for a while and became very engaged with it and became quite good at it, I believe. He also played the harmonica, which he loved to play with. So music was also a very important part of his life. Personally, I'll miss him very, very much. I do miss him very, very much. He was my best friend for 40 years. I'm getting emotional now. His passing leaves a considerable gap in my life. I'll miss him as a sports companion and as a source of clever humor. But most of all, I'll miss the discussions, and I might say debates, that we frequently engaged in about the most profound issues, from politics to cultural relativism to the meanings of life and death. The great thing was that he made me think. He posed questions in a Socratic kind of manner that just simply made you think about things you had never really thought about before. I still have discussions with him in my head, but they're not quite as exhilarating as they were in person. I'm sure that many others here who were fortunate enough to have Jack as part of their lives, as family members, students, colleagues, and others, feel much the same as I do. Thank you.
Mahalo. Thank you, Dr. Howard, for sharing Jack's eulogy and some of your personal experiences with him. Thank you very much. We'll hear a virtual message now from Mr. Roger Sack, Jack's lifelong friend of 72 years. Their friendship began back in 3rd grade in Flushing, New York. Roger now lives in Menlo Park, California, so we welcome him.
I miss Jack. I think of him many times a day. I am always on the verge of calling or emailing him to get his insights into the latest mishigas I am obsessing over. With Jack, it was always a subtle, well-reasoned dialogue. His observations were often revelations to me. Jack's grace and stoicism in the face of years of serious illness were admirable, and his pursuit of an active life, despite these limitations, confirms his character. Jack was one of my oldest and closest friends. I befriended him in Miss Party's 3rd grade class at PS 120 Queens in 1948-49. Even though we attended different high schools, colleges, and graduate schools, and were overseas with the government at the same time on different continents, we connected when we could. During college, we took our first trips to Europe together with Joe Cabranes, driving around the continent in a 2CV. Jack and Pong came to my wedding. Through the years, we kept in contact with his frequent visits to the Bay Area and my 2 trips to Hawaii, as well as regular phone calls and later email. When we'd meet, Sometimes, after an interval of years, it was as though I had seen him the week before. In a friendship that lasted over 70 years, so many anecdotes come to mind that it is difficult to choose ones that best reveal Jack's character and our relationship. I'll recount a couple from our adolescence, early adulthood, and more recently. Calling for Jack. In 7th and 8th grade, through the first years of high school, it was customary for me to call for Jack on a Saturday morning. Jack was a late sleeper. I would walk over to his house around 10 a.m. and say hello to his mom, Sadie, who would then dispatch me upstairs to wake him. This was a ritual I came to relish. I would walk into his room and bestir him as gently as I knew how, by pulling him and his bedclothes onto the floor. Accustomed to this routine and impervious to injury, Jack would go down to the kitchen to fix himself a healthy breakfast of Hebrew national salami and Coca-Cola. We would then often meet up with Joe and or other friends and go into the city to see a foreign movie at a discount theater in Times Square, or catch the Globetrotters at the Garden. Whatever the plan, it inevitably included an obligatory stop at Romeo's Pizzeria. New Year's Eve, 1959. During our college years, the Christmas-New Year's break was a chance to renew friendships and catch up with those who attended different schools. For me, Manhattan was and remains an especially magical place over the holidays. Those of us from rural campuses, like myself, took full advantage of New York, the playground, despite the grim prospect of finals in mid-January. And then there was New Year's Eve. What are you doing New Year's Eve? This was the leading question in our social circle from the beginning of December. A few days after Christmas, I knew the answer. Nothing. No plans. I checked with Jack. He was in a similar situation. 2 invitationless, dateless college guys. What to do? I do not remember whose idea it was. We would go to Times Square to watch the ball drop. Intellectual snobs who were dismissive of popular enthusiasms, we were now about to immerse ourselves in a massive crowd of the very people we consciously avoided. We took the subway to Manhattan. The subway was, and probably still is, let's say, problematical on New Year's Eve. Even relatively early, the quotient of drunks was higher than average. When we emerged at the Times Square station, we found ourselves enveloped by a huge, noisy, mostly male crowd. It was better behaved than we anticipated, and it did not entirely fill the square. Perhaps it was the weather. I checked the record. It was not very cold by New York standards, mid-20s, but it was damp and piercing. We stayed in the square a few hours before midnight, chatting with strangers and looking up at the ball. But Jack was freezing. Eventually we looked at each other with a "what are we doing here" expression, and immediately sought refuge in a still quite empty Bickford's for pie and coffee. While we were eating, the ball dropped. It was our own true Edward Hopper moment. Dining out. After my wife Hinda and I moved with our daughter Lena to the Bay Area in 1988, we saw Jack much more frequently. He visited, often with Pong, to see Leela, and later Leela, Brian, and Ollie. He also came to see us. It became a ritual, especially when he was visiting solo, to go out to dinner together in San Francisco. When we learned he was coming, Hinda and I would puzzle over where we would go. As has been noted, Jack has a penchant for the exotic. This extended to cuisine. He often observed that the Bay Area had much wider variety of restaurants than Honolulu, and that was one of his pleasures of visiting. During these dinners and afterwards, Hinda and Jack invariably engaged in long, erudite conversations, reflecting their shared academic interests, which I interrupted occasionally with a remark from my large store of bon mots. A few years ago, his upcoming visit coincided with a very positive review of a Sardinian restaurant, La Ciccia, in San Francisco. Just the place to take Jack, we agreed. Familiar but different. As a student of Mediterranean history and culture, I was very excited. And the menu would be in Sardinian. It was a success. Jack liked it. We feasted on spaghetti with cured fish roe, octopus stew, and squid in its ink with citrus zest. And the neighborhood was very San Francisco. 2 years ago, Jack and Leela visited San Francisco on their way to Europe. I spent a very enjoyable afternoon with them, taking the ferry to Sausalito, having lunch there, then returning to wander around the ferry building before dropping them off. If I remember correctly, they had reservations at the esteemed, now closed, La Folie that evening. The following day, Hind and I took Jack to Jannah, San Francisco's best Iraqi restaurant. It was not your basic kebab and falafel place, and was an apt corrective to the sybaritic La Folie. It serves distinctive dishes that we thought would satisfy Jack's curiosity, including safeha, a type of Iraqi pizza, and sambosak from phyllo dough. Almost as good as the food is the relaxed atmosphere where we lingered for hours, perfect for spending time with a friend not seen in over a year. After the restaurant, we continued our conversation at Jack's hotel. When we left, Hinda and I agreed that we wished we could see Jack more often. It was our last time together.
Jack was a prominent and highly respected figure in his field, ethnomethodology and conversation analysis. In his announcement of Jack's death to the readers of a leading journal, editor Antaki described Jack as one of ethnomethodology's most original and independent voices. Not all internationally prominent scholars are equally present in their local academic community, but Jack was. His impact at UH reached far beyond the anthropology department. He served on the graduate faculty of the PhD program in Second Language Studies since the program was launched in 1989, so we were colleagues in the same program. Jack also served on dissertation committees in linguistics and Japanese linguistics, and we worked together on many of these committees too. Jack's courses and seminars attracted many graduate students from outside of anthropology. What these students had in common was a keen interest in learning conversation analysis as the complex scholarly undertaking that it is, and learning it from one of its true masters. And Jack unfailingly delivered. He helped students understand the philosophical and conceptual perspective of conversation analysis, and he gave them rigorous training in the practical task of doing CA, that is, transcribing and analyzing recorded data of natural interaction. Jack himself came to conversation analysis as an anthropologist, and this was very helpful for students in the language sciences and for me as his colleague. There's something wrong with the mic, isn't there? Can you hear me? Okay. So let me pick up. So Jack's strengths as a CA researcher coming from anthropology. And this is because we had a shared concern with interaction in different languages and with different cultural practices. From his work on Thai data, Jack understood the complexities of translating talk in other languages into English in our transcripts, which was needed for international publication, and also to make the data available for those faculty members who didn't share the language, which is mostly my case. Even more importantly, Jack was our resident authority on the role of ethnography in conversation analysis. The students and I benefited greatly from his insights and guidance on this topic, which again built on his own research, not only in a Thai village, but also in an even more exotic place, the Federal Trade Commission. Jack was very fond of our local conversation analysis community, and he regularly participated in our data sessions. He also joined many of our social events, such as those in which we celebrated visiting colleagues and the graduate student successes, graduation, and getting a new job. And we have so many fond memories, the students, me, the visiting colleagues. Many of these memories encapsulated in wonderful pictures that you can see on the website. And we regularly went to such local places, well known to most of you as the Ichiriki and the Himalayan kitchen. But Jack also participated very regularly in a particular activity which is called data session, which means that people get together and they pore over a piece of data and they analyze it together. And at UH, these data sessions were launched in 2005. And Jack was a participant from that time onwards. He would always join whenever his schedule and his health permitted. And it was a wonderful opportunity for everybody there to benefit from his astute analysis and profound insights into the data. So it was sort of an ongoing professional development for everybody. Now, Jack also did this extraordinary thing that he said goodbye to this community that he was so fond of. So on May 15th, 2 days before his death, he sent a goodbye message to our group that Leela kindly forwarded, and I would like to take this opportunity to really thank you, Leela. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible for Jack to communicate while he was so ill with his students, his colleagues, and his friends. And we really, really all appreciate this very demanding work that you did on your dad's behalf, but also on our behalf. So I would like to cite from Jack's message to his students. What he wrote is this. He said, "My students have been a great inspiration to me through the years, and I send this with the greatest affection, gratitude, and respect. Thank you all for your contributions to my life, both intellectual and social. With my fondest wishes for your lives and careers, your teacher and student, Jack.
Mahalo, Dr. Casper, for sharing a perspective on Jack's life as a friend and a colleague. Thank you very much. At this time, we have the pleasure of enjoying a collection of photographs that represent moments and precious memories in the life of Jack Bilmes. These pictures are set to some of his favorite music, too, so please enjoy. So many beautiful and meaningful moments. It's a great glimpse into Jack's life with his family and the work that I believe he was truly called to do in life. Jack enjoyed and embraced the works of William Shakespeare, as many of you know. And there are many wise words from Shakespeare's characters. From Hamlet, we hear these very familiar words as a final blessing from Polonius to his son as he's about to depart for university, saying, "This above all things to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night follows the day, that thou canst not be false to any man." Jack was one who lived by these words, and as a teacher and with his family and friends. When sending students out into the world, yes, it's a good advice to say to them, "To thine own self be true." And likened to that, what occurs going forward, which is the result of such advice, is if you're true to yourself, then your living and your interactions with others will reflect that as well. In other words, what people see is truly what they get. Yet, there are other wise voices that have stood the test of time also. And actually, the music video had some words of not quite the ones that you just heard. I love classical music, and Jack had an eclectic taste for many, many ranges of music. But wise voices, not as old as the legacy as Shakespeare, but some modern culture of the 60s and 70s, they had their share of poets too. I should say, we had our share of poets too. Think of one of the songs that was in the video, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. He loved the Rolling Stones too. Because, you know, we go through life and we have many ups and downs in life, and we have challenges in life, and Jack had his too, for we all do. That's what life is about. But in the end, if we can say with full voice, as we heard, well, we could have heard in the photo collage, think of this: "But it's all right now. In fact, it's a gas. Yes, it's all right now, because I'm jumping Jack Flash, hit the gas, gas, gas." That's what was in the video. So you have to imagine Mick and me and Keith Richards on stage singing that. But that was one of his favorite songs. But when you think that way about life, that yes, we have these challenges, yes, we have these ups and downs, but that you rise the next day and you keep it all in perspective and you hit the gas. And Jack lived a full life, a well-balanced life with a beautiful family and great friends. And we give you thanks. We thank you for sharing him with us. So we'll hear a word now from a dear family friend, Mr. Michael Villanueva. Welcome.
Before anything, I'd like to formally express my condolences to Ajahn Bong Suwan and Leela, granddaughters, and Brian. I'm very sorry that Jack has passed, and it was really a great pleasure to know him all these years. So I'm listed as a family friend. I became a friend of the family in 1986 when I started studying at the University of Hawaii. And instead of going to my electrical engineering classes, I went to go speak to Pong Suwan in her office so she could help correct my Thai, because I was studying Thai on my own. And so throughout those times from 1986 to now, it's been quite some time that I have been acquainted and been friends of the family. Jack left two things for me that was really important, and it stood out. The first thing is, as we can all see here today, Jack really loved teaching. He was dedicated to his studies, to his colleagues. He's also dedicated to his students. Even after his retirement, what he did was he still continued to work with students. So from Jack, I learned the very first thing, is that if you have a passion and a dream, follow your dream. The second thing I learned from Jack is that actions speak louder than words. And I'll give you a little story here. And it might be a little bit hard for me to tell to everyone here today, so please bear with me. I live in Seattle now. I've been living in Seattle for about 30 years. And Pong Suwan and Jack came to Seattle on their way to an Alaska cruise. And so I met them, picked them up at the airport, and I took them to the Pike Place Market, which is one of the must-see spots in Seattle. And so as Pong Suwan, Jack and I were kind of sauntering through the market, picking up fruit and flowers and looking at things, we came upon an artist that drew pictures. And this was a Chinese artist, and there were a picture of two cats that were playing with one another. And I'm a cat person. So I asked the artist there, it's like, how much is this painting? And he said $25. And I told Apong in Thai, "Uy, mao man pang," which means, oh no, it's expensive, I won't take it. Jack is here behind us. So we start walking and we start going down through the market again. So I turn around and where's Jack? I don't see Jack. I turn around further and I look. Jack is holding the picture. See? So Jack has been someone for me in my life that every time I look at that picture, it reminds me that it's really what you do to show other people that you care and you love them. And so when I see that picture, I've had it in my office at work, I've moved it into my house and everything. It's always a very, very fond memory that I have of Jack. And so I'm very humbled as well to be able to share this story with everybody today. And as with all of you, I'm sure that we all miss Jack very much. But I hope these stories will bring comfort to you all. Thank you.
Mahalo, Mr. Villanueva, and we appreciate your words, especially that heartwarming story. Thank you very much. So join me now in welcoming the Honorable Judge Jose Cabranes, a lifelong friend, and who will share a virtual message. So we'll welcome him.
I have been asked to reflect on the life of an intimate friend of 7 decades. When Jack's family and mine moved to the Hill, Jack and I entered the 3rd grade at PS 120. We were 9 years old. Jack and I became fast friends. We were typical youths of that period. Smart enough, perhaps, but not obviously brilliant. Annoying to some, and occasionally operating at the margins of acceptable conduct. But at this time and place, our mischievousness was modest enough. There were limits to how obnoxious we could be at the candy store of Jake and Murray Resnick, or at the small public library across the street on Main Street. At that tiny library, Jack and I would go on the way home from school to see if any salacious books might be on offer. The prune-faced librarian, Miss Fisher, was pleased to have any customers of our age, but she was ever on the alert to keep Jack and me out of certain corners of the library, especially the one holding the inflammatory Sex Life of Wild Animals. Jack and I, and our friend Roger Sack, were, I think, precocious politically. That is, from our earliest years of elementary school, we read daily newspapers with care, we overheard conversations among our parents, discussed current events, and imagined that we were entitled to our opinions. Roger and I approached history and current events with zeal, competitiveness, and occasional disagreement. But Jack always maintained a degree of detachment and bemusement. Even at an early age, he was an independent thinker. He was unmoved by arguments resting on authority or loudness. Looking back, it seems we were inseparable throughout the years before college. Let me offer you some examples. Our interest in national affairs, even in grammar school, was reinforced by the first years of televised congressional hearings. First, the Kefauver hearings on organized crime in 1950, and then the 1953 Army McCarthy hearings precipitated by Senator Joe McCarthy's claims of communist infiltration of the federal government. My house was only 2 blocks from Public School 120. So, at our lunch break, we would rush to my house, where my mother had set up trays for the 2 of us to watch the hearings on our newly purchased TV set. After lunch, we would rush back to school for the last periods, including sports. Sadie and Phil and their Gottesman in-laws, who lived in an adjacent attached house, were not intellectuals, but they definitely valued intellectuals. So it is that our early intellectual development was fostered, in my recollection, by Jack's aunt Frida Gottesman, Sadie's sister, who was a stereotypical Jewish mother of that era, constantly promoting book learning without actually knowing anything much about books. Over the years, Jack declined to credit Frida's influence as much as I did. But I well recall Frida steadily reinforcing Jack's intellectual side by buying him inexpensive modern library hardback editions of great works of European literature, notably those of Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Aldous Huxley, names that were totally alien to us 12-year-olds. In my view, Frida stimulated in Jack an early, unforced appetite for serious literature, an interest I'm quick to acknowledge that benefited me as well. We ventured into the city, that was our name for New York City. We ventured into the city occasionally, the trip having no more purpose than to roam aimlessly in Times Square, Greenwich Village, and the Lower East Side slum, still inhabited by immigrants, where the famous Katz's Delicatessen and the equally famous Ratner's Dairy restaurant were to be found. These trips to the city were a species of cultural anthropology, prefiguring Jack's approach to tourism abroad and his eventual career, in which travel consisted largely of trying to size up a city or neighborhood in short order rather than a purposeful program of museums and the like. Jack's incipient liberalism was undermined, in my view, by his attachment to the imperialist New York Yankees. I, in turn, was already an opponent of imperialism and a friend of the underdog, a vociferous fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers of Jackie Robinson, my hero for a lifetime. These pennant races and World Series were largely spent at the Bilmes house, where I was introduced to Sadie Bilmes' extraordinary chopped chicken livers and stuffed cabbage, and to dry Schmulka Bernstein salamis. I repeat, dry Schmulka Bernstein salamis, which hung from the kitchen ceiling. This was a new phenomenon for me. From early in elementary school, Jack seemed destined for a life in the sciences. It was no surprise that he was admitted in 1953 to the highly competitive Bronx High School of Science. This turned out to require a nightmare commutation of 90 minutes by bus in 3 stages to the North Bronx campus. As a result, Jack was repatriated to Flushing High School, which he did not much like, a decision that prompted a life-altering decision to get us both out of the place as quickly as possible. Jack figured out that if we went to summer school after our sophomore year, we could obtain enough credits to permit us to graduate a year early. So, in the summer of 1956, Jack and I commuted by subway to Bryant High School in Long Island City, Queens, where the students were considerably tougher and more threatening than those at Flushing High School, and that was saying something. We took 2 courses, in English and Modern World History, that we would remember fondly for a lifetime. Perhaps because we were the dominant high achievers in the classes and our general academic averages were thus greatly improved. Like most New York academic high school students, we graduated at the ridiculous age of 16. Jack and I graduated from college in 1961, and with accumulated savings, we headed for our greatest adventure together, to a still inexpensive Europe for 100 days. 100 days, traveling on inexpensive student charters and packing a copy of the earliest edition of Arthur Frommer's Europe on $5 per day. We rented the slowest and ugliest car ever made, a Citroën 2CV, 2 chevaux, and we traveled through France, Spain, Morocco, Italy, Austria, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and back to Paris via the Low Countries. On the very day that Jack and I drove from Berlin through East Germany on our way to Denmark, the communist regime began to build the now infamous wall to lock in the East Germans. We learned about it only after we had left East German territory. It was quite the learning experience. Jack and I separated in Paris in early September 1961. I was headed for Yale Law School, and Jack had no settled professional plans. Enthralled by Paris, Jack announced to me that he had planned to stay there to write. To write. I jokingly said that he planned to be unemployed and poor, and to live in a garret on the left bank until his literary talents were discovered. As fortune would have it, Jack received a letter from home reporting his acceptance for the newly established alluring Peace Corps. Soon, Jack was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, destined for Thailand with one of the first Peace Corps contingents. The rest is history. It was there that he met the love of his life, Pong Sawan, who was a Fulbright student in the U.S. from Thailand. In New Haven, I was learning enough law, not much law, I admit, to have Jack as my first client. While still in law school, it was my task to find a way for Pong to obtain a visa to return to the U.S. with Jack, circumnavigating the law that Fulbright students could not re-enter the U.S. for a certain number of years after finishing studies in the U.S. I am thus able to take some small credit. I am pleased to take some small credit for the union of Jack and Pong and their project. Jack was not religious, but I think he would indulge my references to the deity in quoting a famous medieval Spanish elegy by Jorge Manrique from Galicia, where Pong, Jack, Kate, and I spent some time together in 2019 during a cruise to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Its beauty is not well captured in translation, but I think it aptly describes Jack's last hours. I offer it in Spanish first, or kind of Spanish. Así con tal entender todos sentidos humanos conservados cerca de su mujer, de su hija y criados, dio su alma, y aunque la vida murió, nos dejó harto consuelo su memoria. Imperfectly translated by me as follows. And so at the end, having preserved his full moral consciousness and surrounded by his wife, his daughter, his granddaughters, and caretakers, he gave up his soul. And although his life has perished, the memory of his life remains a source of consolation to us. Thank you from New Haven, Connecticut, for letting me participate in this program.
Aloha. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Malia Goldstein. I'm Jack's youngest granddaughter. And I just wanted to give everyone a big mahalo for showing up and for those that contributed and shared in this program. And a special thanks to Roger and Joe for sending in the videos with stories of Grampy. I really appreciate the opportunity to hear more of him, especially parts that I didn't previously know of. So I want to personally thank all of you for allowing me to continue to get to know him even after life. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say I find it hard to speak on this. In fact, I spent a lot of time just sitting, staring, thinking, trying to come up with things to say for this, and I didn't have much luck. But thankfully, I was lucky enough to be able to say everything I needed to Grampy in a letter I was able to give to him before his passing. And it took a while to write that as well, but I was able to get it all out into words. So I'm going to read you guys a short excerpt from that letter, and then I'm going to wrap it up and send you guys to have some refreshments, okay? Okay. As I write this, I'm sitting with Ollie in your study, tinkering with your drums and bells, reminiscing on when we were younger. We're talking about all the tricks you showed us, how you'd play your harmonica for us, how you'd educate us on music and media from before we were born. And as I'm sitting here on your little red futon, thinking to myself, I'm realizing just how happy you've made us. I've always looked up to you, and I always will. You're the coolest ass-kicking grandpa there ever was. I'll miss you dearly, but I'm nothing short of proud and thankful to have known you. You've made a beautiful, lasting impact on my life, and I'll continue to be inspired by you as well as aspire to be like you. I love you very, very much. Mahalo nui loa, everyone. Thank you for gathering in remembrance of Jack Bilmes. Please have a beautiful day. Take care of yourselves. Don't forget to hydrate, and join us for pupus. Mahalo.